Imagine walking around with a thorn lodged beneath your skin that no one can see. You go about your day, you talk, you smile, you try to seem normal, but any slight brush makes the pain flare up again. That is how many people live after being wounded, not because of what happened once, but because of what keeps burning inside long after the moment has passed. And then the question is no longer who hurt you, but why you still allow that wound to decide how you think, how you feel, and how you react. Most people believe suffering comes directly from what others do, but that is not always true. Many times the initial blow ends, and what really destroys you inside is the mind replaying it, magnifying it, giving something a sacred place that should have been cast out long ago. That is why no one will ever hurt you again if you master this. Not because the world will suddenly become kind, but because there comes a point when you stop handing your peace over to anyone who did not know how to care for your heart. In this video, you're going to discover how to reclaim that inner command that almost everyone gives away without realizing it. You will learn how to stop the reaction before it takes control of you, how to set boundaries without noise, how to stop feeding thoughts that only weaken you, and how to turn pain into a discipline that makes you calmer, steadier, and freer. All of this comes from a deep wisdom that joins the clarity of Stoicism with the quiet strength of the Word of God, not to harden you, but to teach you how to live with discernment, peace, and authority over your inner world. And in the end, you will see a lesson that can even change the way you finish your days and lay down your burdens. I am Gabriel, and this is the Stoic Garden. Stay until the end, because today we are going to walk through 9 lessons, and the last one may restore a peace you may not have truly known in a very long time. And if you feel that understanding the problem is no longer enough, but that you need to spend 30 days working on your mind, your boundaries, and your rest in God, in the description of this video you have access to the Stoic Journey, created precisely to help you stop living at the mercy of what wounds you. Let us begin. What is it that really hurts you when someone betrays you, despises you, or speaks to you as if you were worth nothing? Many would say it is the other person's action, the coldness of the gesture, the injustice of what happened. But if that were the whole truth, then all of us would be destroyed forever by every blow we receive. And that is not what happens. Some people go through terrible humiliations and still keep their center, while others remain trapped for years in a single scene they cannot stop reliving. That is where the first lesson in this journey begins. The wound does not enter through what they do to you, but through what your mind allows. This does not mean justifying evil or pretending pain does not exist. It means looking at the exact place where that pain takes root. Because an offense may knock at the door, but the one who decides to make it a permanent guest is you. The problem is that almost no one wants to accept this. It is more comfortable to think everything comes from the outside, that peace depends on other people being right, sensitive, fair, and considerate. Of course, because we all know how disciplined the world usually is when it comes to protecting our hearts, the reality is different. Most people act from their confusion, their ego, their smallness, or their inner misery. And if your peace depends on them maturing, then you are placing your life in hands that are far too cheap. Epictetus, who went from slave to teacher of inner freedom, said it with a clarity that is still unsettling centuries later. It is not events that disturb people, but the judgments they form about those events. That is the heart of everything. Not denying what happened, but examining what story you started telling yourself afterward. Maybe someone ignored you, and your mind turned that into, I am worth nothing. Maybe someone left, and your mind translated that absence into, people always leave me. Maybe someone spoke with cruelty, and your mind signed a secret agreement with that cruelty, as if every outside word deserved the weight of a final sentence. And here it is worth pausing for a moment, because this part changes everything when you dare to ask yourself an uncomfortable question. Does what happened hurt you, or does what you have repeated 1,000 times since then hurt you? Did the event wound you, or is the interpretation that turned it into your identity the thing tearing you apart? Some wounds last longer because of badly managed memory than because of the original blow. The mind, when it is untrained, has that strange habit of opening the same scar over and over again, and then acting surprised that it never closes. That is why so many people keep bleeding in silence, even when the scene is already over. The body left the problem, but the mind keeps returning like an obedient servant to the place where it was humiliated, and every return reinforces the prison. Every repetition makes the story more solid. Every thought allowed to remain unexamined builds a higher wall. In that way, what began as an offense ends up becoming an internal structure from which the person sees themselves, relates to others, and defends themselves. They no longer just remember the damage, they begin to live from it. Understanding this does not make you cold. It makes you responsible. It forces you to recognize that between what is done to you and what it comes to mean inside you, there is a sacred space that should not be occupied by just anyone. That is where you decide whether an experience will become a permanent wound or a test that failed to conquer your inner life. That is where you recover your dignity. Because when you discover that your mind does not have to bow before every blow, you also discover that no one can fully dominate you unless you hand them the throne. And that already begins to change everything. After understanding that a deep wound does not come only from what happens, but from the permission it is given within you, an even more decisive truth appears. Your inner life cannot keep being a land without authority, a place where any emotion can walk in, shout, break things, and sit down as if it owned the house. Many people live this way without even noticing. They react to everything, absorb everything, carry everything, and then wonder why they cannot find peace. Now it is time to talk about the second lesson: reclaim authority over your inner territory. Governing your inner world begins by distinguishing between two dimensions that almost everyone confuses. One is what happens outside: words, rejection, disrespect, betrayal, silence, loss, injustice. The other is what belongs to you to govern: your judgment, your response, your focus, your boundaries, the direction of your thoughts. When you confuse the two, you end up trying to control people, circumstances, and outcomes that will never fully obey you. And in the meantime, you neglect the one thing you actually could bring into order with firmness: your own mind. That is the great exhaustion of so many weary souls. They spend years trying to fix other people's character, explain themselves better, be understood, be validated, be treated the way they deserve. And while they chase all of that, they abandon themselves within. They become watchmen of other people's world and are unable to guard their own hearts. What a ruinous trade! They worry about shutting the mouth of the one who wounds them, but not about closing the inner door through which that wound keeps entering every day. Reclaiming authority does not mean hardening yourself or pretending nothing affects you. It means refusing to react as if every outside stimulus had automatic authority over you. It means learning to say inwardly, "This happened, yes, but it will not decide who I am or dictate my behavior." And that difference may seem small, but it changes an entire life. Because the moment you stop responding from invasion and begin responding from mastery, the outside world loses part of its power over you. Halfway through this path, it is worth asking another question that many avoid. Who is really in charge inside you when someone provokes you, your conscience or your impulse? Because if any gesture from someone else can drag you along, then you are not ruling yet, you are only reacting. And a mind that only reacts never rests. It lives on guard, it lives tense, it lives obeying the last blow it received. That is why so many people end up exhausted. Not because of too much work, but because of too much inner disorder. Inner authority also requires mental boundaries. Not every thought deserves to be heard. Not every emotion deserves to become a decision. Not every memory deserves to be recreated every night, as if it were a sacred ceremony. Sometimes peace begins when you stop handing a microphone to what came only to break you down inside. And that is where a much deeper kind of strength begins than simple endurance. It is no longer just about holding on. It is about leading. When you reclaim that authority, something settles in your posture, in your gaze, and even in your silence. You no longer move with the desperation of someone who needs everything outside to be in order just to breathe. You begin to live from a different place, one that is calmer, steadier, cleaner. And even if the world remains unpredictable, you are no longer at the mercy of every wave. Because the one who takes back authority over their inner territory stops being conquered ground and begins to become a soul that is hard to bring down. How much of the damage comes from the blow itself? And how much is born in the moment you decide what that blow means about you? That is a question almost no one asks with honesty, because it forces you to look at a silent and deeply destructive habit. We do not suffer only because of what happens, but because of the meaning we attach to it like a second wound. And once that meaning settles in, we no longer remember a fact. We begin to obey an interpretation. We have reached the third point of this video, and it is this. Do not give meaning to every blow you receive. Someone ignores you, and your mind is quick to translate it as contempt. Someone corrects you harshly, and your inner world records it as humiliation. Someone pulls away, and within a few hours, you have already built an entire story about abandonment, rejection, and heartbreak. That is how an untrained mind works. It does not receive facts as facts, but as raw material for manufacturing inner condemnations. And then, as if that were not enough, it rereads its own condemnations and takes them as truth. A perfect machine for suffering more than necessary. Marcus Aurelius, who knew the inner noise of the human soul quite well, wrote that the happiness of life depends on the quality of your thoughts, and that this is why you must watch carefully what you allow to dwell in your mind. There is nothing decorative about that philosophy. It is a serious warning. Because if everything that happens outside enters as absolute meaning, your peace disappears. You no longer live in reality. You live in the exaggerated, darkened, dramatic version that your mind has chosen to enshrine as final. Look at how often suffering grows because of a phrase that keeps repeating inside. They do not respect me. The same thing always happens to me. No one values me. There must be something wrong with me. And so, from thought to thought, the offense stops being an episode and turns into identity. Do you see how dangerous that is? You are not only carrying what happened, but a definition of yourself born in a moment of pain. And almost always those definitions are lies, but they feel deep, and that is why people believe them. Here an uncomfortable irony appears. Many say they want to heal, but they keep feeding the story that gives them permission to feel broken. They keep replaying the scene, they keep polishing the memory, they keep adding details, intentions, and conclusions they cannot even prove, as if the soul found some strange loyalty in refusing to let go of what made it sick. And of course, afterward, they wonder why they cannot rest, because it is not enough to have left the situation. You also have to stop lending it your inner voice. That does not mean becoming naive or denying the evil in others. It means learning not to give every blow the power to define your worth, your future, and your identity. A fact can hurt without becoming a sentence. A betrayal can teach you without becoming your last name. A loss can break you for a time without becoming your permanent way of seeing life. That is the difference between a wounded person and a person ruled by their wound. When you stop giving meaning to every blow, something very important begins to change. The mind stops being a factory of chains and becomes a place of discernment. You no longer react by believing everything you think in the middle of pain. You begin to separate what happened from what you are imagining, what hurt from what you are exaggerating, what was real from what your fear added. And that separation is a form of freedom, because the world may keep throwing blows, but not all of them deserve to settle in your soul as if they were revealed truth. What exactly happens in that small, decisive second before you respond with anger, anxiety, or that desperate need to strike back? Almost everything is decided there, even though most people do not even notice it. They believe they react because they had no other choice, because the other person pushed them too far, because anyone would have done the same. But that is not true. Before the word, before the gesture, before the impulsive message, there is a brief threshold where you can still remain whole or hand yourself over to chaos. And that brings us to the fourth lesson in this journey. Mastery begins in the instant before you react. That instant seems tiny, but it separates a governed mind from a dragged-around mind. Because reacting is not always strength. Sometimes it is pure slavery wearing the tone of courage. The person thinks they are asserting themselves, defending themselves, refusing to be pushed around, when in reality they are only obeying the loudest emotion of the moment. The other person pushes a button and they respond exactly as programmed. What a great victory, right? Calling it character does not change the fact that you are still easy to control. The ancient Stoics insisted on this with a seriousness that is still needed today. Epictetus taught that you must examine the impression before giving it your assent, and Seneca warned that anger, if it is not restrained at its first impulse, ends up ruling the person who thought they were using it. They were not talking about suppressing feelings like a cold stone. They were talking about not handing the throne to the soul's first movement. Because an emotion may appear without asking permission, but turning it into behavior is something else entirely. Think of how much damage is born in that unguarded second. A response meant to wound, a call made out of desperation, a message sent only because you could not tolerate the silence, an argument where you end up stooping to the very level you swore you would never touch. And afterward comes the exhaustion, the shame, the regret, that bitter feeling that you betrayed yourself because you could not endure a few seconds of inner fire. Was it worth it? Was it really necessary to answer in that moment, as if your dignity depended on not staying silent? Real strength begins when you learn to endure that threshold without instantly turning it into reaction. That is where a kind of character is formed that does not need to explode in order to feel alive. The book of Proverbs says it with extraordinary precision. Better is the one who is slow to anger than the mighty, and the one who rules his spirit than the one who takes a city. That means true power is not found in controlling the scene, but in not losing yourself within it. Sometimes the highest victory happens when no one sees it, in a silent second when you decide not to obey the impulse. And if you have made it this far, pause for a moment and recognize something important. You are not hearing this message by accident. There is something inside you that is already tired of living at the mercy of what hurts it and is looking for peace, clarity, and a wiser way to respond. If what you have heard so far is helping you, subscribe and leave a like. And in the comments, write your first name or the word present, along with the country you are watching from, so I can see from what corner of the world this Christian Stoic community is gathering. And if you do not want to stay only in reflection, but want to begin practicing for 30 days a serious discipline to strengthen your inner peace, your character, your boundaries, and the way you respond to what wounds you, you can join the 30-day Stoic Journey through the link in the description of this video. Stay with me, because there are still crucial parts ahead, and the last one holds something that could even change the way you end each day and lay down what you should no longer keep carrying. There are people who believe protecting themselves means talking more, clarifying more, justifying more, insisting more. They think that if they find the right words, the other person will finally understand the harm they caused and change the way they treat them. But that almost never happens. Someone who did not want to respect you when they had your exhaustion, your effort, and your silence right in front of them is unlikely to start doing so because you offer them a more polished explanation. And that brings us to the fifth lesson of this video. Dignity is protected with boundaries, not explanations. Over-explaining yourself is often a sign that you are still waiting for permission to walk away, as if you needed the other person to approve your exhaustion, validate your wound, or sign off on the legitimacy of your distance. And while you wait for that approval, you remain available for more disrespect. You stay there, trying to translate your pain for someone who in many cases already understood it perfectly and simply did not care. That is a bitter truth, but it sets you free. Sometimes they did not misunderstand you. Sometimes they understood you clearly and still chose to keep acting the same way. That is why a boundary is not a punishment or a dramatic scene. It is a sober line, an inner decision that then becomes visible behavior. It does not always need long speeches, theatrical endings, or memorable goodbyes. Sometimes it is expressed in the simplest and most powerful way, by no longer staying where you are being worn down, by no longer responding where you are being provoked, by no longer opening the door where you have already seen the same lack of consideration too many times. A mature soul learns something an anxious mind takes a long time to accept. Not everything deserves a conversation, and not every conversation deserves your presence. Seneca, who understood the value of restraint very well, warned that we often regret having spoken, but rarely regret having remained silent with wisdom. And that touches this part directly, because many people are not destroyed only by what they tolerate, but by the exhaustion of endlessly explaining why they can no longer keep tolerating it. They get trapped in a kind of endless trial where they present evidence, display wounds, arrange arguments, and wait for sensitivity on the other side. But dignity is not defended in emotional courtrooms where the judge has already decided not to listen to you. Here it is worth looking at something honestly. How many times have you given explanations not to communicate, but to avoid feeling guilty? How many times have you kept talking to someone who had already crossed the line simply because you were afraid of seeming harsh, ungrateful, or dramatic? That guilt has kept many people tied to relationships, patterns, and environments they should have left behind long ago. And in the meantime, they call kindness what is really a slow abandonment of themselves. Setting boundaries does not make you cruel. It makes you clear. It is not closing your heart. It is closing the door to abuse. It is not hardening yourself. It is refusing to cooperate with what weakens you. Even from a place of faith, love does not require you to remain available to what destroys your peace. There are doors that also honor God when they are closed in time, because not every form of staying is mercy, and not every form of enduring is virtue. Sometimes walking away in silence is the cleanest way to preserve your soul without filling it with bitterness. When you understand this, dignity stops being a beautiful idea and becomes a concrete way of living. You no longer beg for understanding in order to take care of yourself. You no longer confuse patience with permissiveness. You no longer believe that protecting yourself means failing someone else. You discover that well-placed boundaries do not make unnecessary noise, but they completely change the way others are allowed to enter your life. And from there, you begin to feel something many people had forgotten: the relief of not having to explain yourself so much just to respect yourself. Pain that is not worked through rots inside. At first it seems like nothing more than sadness, exhaustion, disappointment, a stab that shows up from time to time. But if you leave it there too long, it changes form. It becomes resentment, suspicion, hardness, bitterness, a twisted way of looking at everyone and at yourself. That is why it is not enough to endure what hurts you. You have to transform it before it starts poisoning everything. And here we come to the 6th lesson of this video. Turn pain into discipline before it becomes poison. I remember one night when I sat alone in a nearly dark room, with a small lamp glowing on the table and the distant sound of cars passing on the street. I had spent the whole day pretending I was fine, answering normally, doing everything I had to do, but inside I felt a heavy mix of anger and exhaustion. My chest felt tight, my jaw was tense, and there was that strange feeling of being wounded, and at the same time furious that I was still wounded. I looked at my phone several times, as if I were going to find an explanation there, a repair, an apology that never came. And the more I looked at it, the deeper I sank. The room was quiet, but my mind felt like a room full of slamming doors. At one point I got up, went to the bathroom, and looked at myself in the mirror with that expression people wear when they no longer want to keep lying to themselves. There was nothing grand about that scene. No epic music, no instant revelations. Just a tired man with heavy eyes trying to understand when exactly pain had started governing his routine. I realized something uncomfortable. What had been done to me was no longer the only problem. The problem was what I was doing with it every day. I was feeding it. I was training it. I was giving it time, images, words, and even a kind of secret altar in my habits. That night I did not solve my life, but I made one concrete decision. I put the phone away, took out a notebook, and started writing not what the other person had done, but what I had to stop allowing within myself. I wrote that I could not keep waking up and going to bed with the same scene in my head. I wrote that I needed to bring order to my mornings, my thoughts, my body, my prayer. I wrote that if the pain was going to stay for a while, it would at least have to pay rent by working in my favor. It sounds like a harsh phrase, but sometimes you need to speak to yourself that way to get out of the swamp. Musonius Rufus, a teacher of austerity and tested character, taught that adversity does not destroy the virtuous man, but offers him the field necessary to exercise his character. And James, from the perspective of faith, wrote that trial produces patience. Both ideas meet at a deep point. Suffering can either deform you or train you. The blow does not decide that by itself. What decides it is what you do afterward. It depends on whether you turn the wound into an excuse to degrade yourself, or into a discipline to rebuild yourself. Because there are pains that do not heal immediately, but they can begin to bring order to you if you stop treating them like a sentence and start treating them like a school. Since then, I understood that discipline does not always begin with big goals. Sometimes it begins with almost invisible acts, turning off in time what unsettles you, stopping the habit of checking what throws you into chaos, walking in silence when your mind wants to shut itself in, praying when pride wants to harden you, sitting down with a notebook when chaos wants to speak for you. The pain is still there for a while, yes, but it stops ruling. It stops leaking into everything. It stops becoming identity. And little by little, something cleaner begins to emerge. Character, steadiness, a sobriety you did not have before. That is why you must decide what you're going to do with what is hurting you right now. Because pain never stays still. Either it turns into discipline or it becomes poison. Either it trains you or it intoxicates you. Either it forces you to grow or it gets you used to living from the wound. And when you finally understand that, you no longer ask only how to stop suffering. You begin to ask what kind of person this trial can make you if you face it with honesty, with order, and with God at the center. After learning not to react on impulse, to set boundaries, and to turn pain into discipline, you come to a boundary many people do not know how to cross. There are things that no longer depend on your character, your effort, or your clarity. There are injustices you cannot correct, people you cannot convince, truths you cannot impose, and debts you are not the one meant to collect. And when you keep trying to solve everything with your own hands, what looked like strength starts to turn into exhaustion. We now enter the 7th lesson of this journey. What you cannot control, hand over to the justice of God. This is where the proud mind usually stumbles, because part of us wants to fix everything. It wants the other person to acknowledge it, the truth to be made clear, the wound to be seen, the offense not to go unpunished. And on the surface that sounds noble. But many times it is not born from love of truth, but from the inability to let go. We want to control the outcome, administer justice, monitor the punishment, as if peace could only come after seeing the other person bow their head. And so the soul never rests. It remains tied to the offender, not by closeness but by obsession. Faith breaks that chain in a way pride does not easily tolerate. Because handing something over to God means accepting that not everything has to pass through your hands in order to be set right. It means recognizing that there are battles draining you precisely because they were never yours to fight. Christ, in the most decisive night, said, "Not my will, but yours be done." It was not weakness. It was the highest form of strength. It was the calm surrender of the illusion of control. And the one who begins to understand this discovers that the right kind of surrender does not humiliate the soul. It frees it. How many nights have you lost trying to close a case that remains open only inside you? How much energy have you spent imagining conversations, delayed answers, scenes where everything is finally made clear? Most people do not live exhausted only because of what they suffered, but because of everything they still want to manage afterward. They want to be judge, prosecutor, and executioner all at once, and then they wonder why peace never comes. It never comes because a mind that will not let go ends up serving the very pain it claims it wants to overcome. Handing over to God what you cannot control does not mean resigning yourself to evil or calling injustice good. It means stopping carrying on your back a task that is breaking you and was never yours to carry. It means saying with humility, "This hurt me. This was real, I do not approve of it. But I will no longer keep sacrificing my peace to sustain a struggle that only you can judge perfectly." Isaiah expressed it beautifully when he said that God keeps in perfect peace the one whose mind remains fixed on him. That peace does not come from understanding everything, but from no longer demanding that you control everything. And here something deep happens. When you let go of the need to correct, take revenge, convince, or force a resolution, the soul regains space. It no longer revolves only around the wound. It no longer lives looking backward. It begins to breathe from a higher place. You discover that trusting in God's justice does not make you passive. It makes you cleaner. You act where you should act, step away where you should step away, speak when it is right, but without that dark fire of wanting to control someone else's destiny. There is a very particular peace that comes only when you understand that you do not have to resolve everything yourself in order to be at peace. And that peace is not avoidance. It is spiritual rest. It is letting go of clenching your fists over matters that do not answer to your will. It is allowing God to carry what has already proven too heavy for your mind. And from there, you begin to heal in a deeper way, because now you are not only growing stronger inside, you are also learning to live without taking the place that belongs only to Him. By this point, you have already seen that it is not enough to endure pain or to react better, or even to hand over to God what you cannot control. There is one more task, quieter and more constant, one that happens every day, sometimes from the moment you open your eyes. It is about watching what enters your mind, what stays, what is given a seat, what takes shape, and what begins to rule you without asking permission. Because if you do not guard that threshold, you will end up fighting again and again against enemies you yourself allowed in. And that brings us to the 8th lesson of this video. Guard your thoughts like someone protecting a sacred gate. The mind is not a public hallway where everything should move freely through, but many people treat it that way. They let in poisonous memories, dark assumptions, repeated fears, words others said to them years ago that still echo as if they were eternal truth. Everything gets in, everything gets mixed together, everything stays. Then anxiety shows up, irritation shows up, the soul grows tired, and they are surprised. As if anyone could live in peace while leaving the door wide open to every thought that arrives dirty, loud, or distorted. Solomon wrote, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." He did not say guard your image or your reputation or your plans. He said guard your heart, because far more is decided there than most people realize. And Paul was even more precise when he taught that every thought must be taken captive into obedience. That is not a soft image. It speaks of discipline. It speaks of refusing to let any idea sit at the center of your inner life as if it had the right to rule there. This is where you need to ask yourself a very serious question. When a thought enters your mind, do you examine it or obey it? Because those are two very different things. Some thoughts only want to stir you up. Others want to humiliate you. Others push you to suspect everyone, relive the past, or anticipate disasters that may never even happen. Seneca said that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, and how right he was. There are people who are not being attacked at this very moment, yet they live as if an invasion has been taking place inside their head for years. Guarding the sacred gate of the mind requires daily firmness. It means learning to recognize what comes disguised as reflection when it is really rumination. What looks like caution but is really chronic fear. What presents itself as memory when it really only wants to reopen the wound. Not everything you think deserves your trust. Not everything you feel deserves direction. Not everything you remember deserves a place to stay. And when you begin to understand that, the mind stops being a chaotic battlefield and starts to feel more like a consecrated place. Donald Robertson, who has brought Stoic discipline together with modern psychology, points out that questioning our automatic interpretations is the first step in weakening the power irrational thoughts have over us. Put simply, that means you do not have to believe your first impression. You can stop. You can examine it. You can say, is what I am thinking true? Is it helpful? Is it clean? Does it bring me closer to God, or only pull me deeper down? That kind of vigilance is not exhausting. On the contrary, it prevents immense wear and tear. And when you practice this consistently, something begins to change in the way you live through the day. You no longer spiral so easily. Not every memory drags you away. Not every word from someone else turns into an inner sentence. The mind begins to develop filters, emotion stops leading on its own, and the heart regains a sense of refuge. Not because the world has stopped being difficult, but because now you understand that one of the highest forms of peace lies in deciding what crosses that gate and what stays outside. And the most intimate part is still ahead, because the final section will not speak only about protecting the day, but about how to surrender it completely before night falls. Most people end the day with their body in bed and their mind still standing, like an exhausted guard who refuses to leave his post. They turn off the light, close their eyes, but inside they keep arguing, replaying scenes, imagining responses, picking up again what has already worn them down for hours. That is how the day never really ends. It only changes shape. And that is why we have arrived at the 9th and final lesson of this video, perhaps the most intimate of them all. The 5-minute ritual that gives you back the night and hands the day over to God. If you do not end the day intentionally, pain goes to bed with you. It gets into your pillow, mixes with your thoughts, and keeps working while your body tries to rest. That is where that strange exhaustion comes from, the kind that is not solved by sleeping 8 hours, because it does not come only from physical effort, but from emotional weight that was never released. Christ said, each day has enough trouble of its own. But we do the opposite. We take the trouble of the day, polish it, enlarge it, and then drag it into the night as if it were a sacred duty. Then we wonder why we wake up just as wounded. That is why this ritual is not a spiritual accessory or a nice habit for especially disciplined people. It is a way of protecting the soul before sleep. For 5 minutes, nothing more, you are going to interrupt the habit of going to bed invaded. The first minute will be real silence. No phone, no television, no borrowed noise. Just you breathing slowly and acknowledging before God what today tried to stay living in your mind. Do not disguise it. Do not over-explain it. Do not turn it into a speech. Name it plainly. Anger, sadness, humiliation, anxiety, fear, exhaustion. Sometimes peace begins when you stop running from what you feel and place it before God without performance. In the second and third minute, you're going to do a more precise inner cleansing. Ask yourself what part of what happened really belongs to you to carry, and what part you are still holding on to out of pride, habit, or fear of letting go. Here, it helps to remember a truth that is both Stoic and biblical. Not everything that entered your mind deserves to stay. Not everything that hurt you deserves to keep ruling you. You can repeat in a low voice a simple, steady mantra without grandeur. What I could not resolve today, I hand over to God. My mind rests in His peace. Repeat that slowly, not like a magic phrase, but like an act of conscious surrender, like someone taking the throne away from the thought that has been ruling all day. In the fourth minute, give thanks for something small and real. Not a long list, just one concrete thing that brings you back to solid ground, having endured without breaking, having stayed silent where before you would have reacted, having understood an uncomfortable truth, having made it to the end of the day alive. That gesture brings order to your vision. It reminds your soul that not everything was a wound, that not everything was darkness, that God was also holding things together, that your anxiety did not even notice. And in the fifth minute, say a brief prayer, almost stripped bare. Lord, what is too heavy for me? I no longer want to keep carrying alone. Guard my mind tonight. Nothing more. No long speeches, no drama, just surrender. Just... Pierre Hadot explained that philosophical thought only becomes real strength when it is translated into daily practices that reshape perception. And that is exactly what this ritual is. A short practice, but a serious one. A small nighttime act that, repeated faithfully, begins to change the way you end the day and the way you begin the next one. Because a mind that learns to surrender before sleep stops spending the whole night fighting battles that were never meant for it. And when that happens, rest stops being only rest for the body and begins to become a refuge for the soul. Do it tonight. Do not wait until you feel better to begin, because the reason you begin is to stop living the same way over and over again. 5 minutes, silence, examination, mantra, gratitude, surrender. That is all. And yet a deeper transformation may begin there than you can imagine. Because in the end, mastering your mind is not only about resisting what hurts you during the day, but about learning not to keep bleeding inside, while God once again offers you the chance to rest. If you have made it this far, then you already know you are not part of that majority who listen to deep words only to feel accompanied for a moment and then go right back to the same inner prison. You have endured looking straight at something many prefer to avoid. That much of pain is not sustained only by what others do, but by the disorder with which we leave our minds, our reactions, and our nights. Others will keep blaming the whole world while handing their peace over to every wound. You, on the other hand, are now facing a more serious decision. Keep living like a territory open to everything that hurts you, or begin to govern yourself with more truth, more dignity, and more God. But listening to this video is not enough. Nothing truly changes if, once it ends, you go back to lying down with the same unguarded mind and the same disordered heart. That is why I want you to leave a visible sign today of the decision you are making. Write in the comments the phrase, "My mind rests in God," and tell me what country you are watching from. Not as a mechanical habit, but as a way of publicly declaring that you no longer want to keep living at the mercy of every blow, every dark thought, and every wound that refuses to leave. I am Gabriel, and this is the Stoic Garden. This channel exists because in a time when too many people live exhausted, confused, and spiritually scattered, there needs to be a place where the soul, character, pain, and peace are spoken of with firmness and without ornament. We are not here to entertain the wound, but to awaken the one who is already tired of being ruled by it. And if you feel that someone close to you needs to hear this message, share it. Sometimes a single truth spoken at the right time can prevent years of silent wear and tear. Subscribe if you want to keep walking with us in this community of people who no longer want to react the way they used to, think the way they used to, or live the way they used to. And do not stop here, because this is not the end of the road, but only a door that has opened. Join the 30-day Stoic Journey. The link is in my profile. Here on the screen you have other videos that can help you keep strengthening your mind, your boundaries, and your inner peace. The transformation does not end with this conversation. This is only where it begins.